girl who got the nose job.
And you know what lady I'm talking about?
Zori and her new nose.
Ever since that Zuri girl,
Everyone is coming for her neck.
what's going on with all the nose propaganda?
I'm the one that's been causing all this frenzy.
When I was younger, I grew up watching a lot of Disney movies because we had this tiny TV in our car. One of the Disney princess movies that was in rotation was Cinderella. And Cinderella, like a lot of the other Disney princesses, followed a particular template. She was very thin, she was white, she was pretty, and that's pretty much the representation that I grew up with when it came to princess movies. And then we finally got Tiana, the first Black Disney princess. And unfortunately, for most of the movie, she was a frog. I didn't really grow up with Princess Tiana, but I'm sure for a lot of the little Black girls who are finally getting a little bit of representation, they're being sent a weird message. You could be seen in movies, but only halfway. You can't necessarily be human throughout the whole thing. And even if we fast forward to more recent years, we see characters like Moana and Mirabelle in leading roles. Of course, this is a great step forward in representation, especially coming from a huge company like Disney, but there's still this subtle tension in the way that their features are drawn. Are they animated in a way that rounds out the edges of ethnic identity just enough that they are palatable? It's not just about being seen anymore, it's about being seen perfectly. We have this expectation that these characters be everything. They can't really just exist, they have to represent, redeem, and elevate all at the same time. And this makes sense in a lot of ways. After growing up and seeing your features used as a punchline or perpetuating stereotypes, of course you're going to start to crave this perfect sort of representation. You want the representation to not only be visible but also aspirational. But I also can see how this sort of craving can turn into a trap, because now every character that does look like you has to be idealized and it has to be inspirational. And so now we're narrowing and limiting who we think deserves to represent the ethnicity, who gets to be the face of a particular story, and even whose stories deserve to be told.
This particular mindset has always scared me, and I'm seeing it come up more with this discourse about Francesca playing Juliet. And it's that some Black women only want the most prettiest, gorgeous, most favorable Black women to represent us because they don't want anyone else making us look bad. Like, do you know how dangerous and dehumanizing that is? And as a Black woman, I don't want to hear you complain about people holding us to different standards when you're doing it to other Black women as well. Like, someone had the nerve to fix their mouth to say Francesca is embarrassing us. She's making us look bad. How is she making us look bad by earning her spot in a play?
Anyways, I've been thinking about all of this because the rapper Glorilla allegedly got a nose job, and people have a lot to say about it, and unfortunately mostly it's bad. That wasn't really the first time that she's faced this kind of scrutiny, because even before all of these surgery speculations, Glorilla has been getting picked on for her looks. There was a video of her getting her makeup done that was posted by the makeup artist, and it sparked a wave of a lot of mean comments about the way she naturally appeared. Because of this, she decided to go live on Instagram and speak her mind on all of the bullying that she was receiving. She clearly was feeling fed up with all of the nitpicking, and she wanted to remind people to embrace their own beauty, and she was making it clear that she wasn't going to let trolls decide her worth. And Black women are constantly getting scrutinized under a microscope because of the way they look, especially the ones that are in the spotlight. They're told to love themselves as they are, but they're also told that they're not good enough if they don't look a certain way. So when people started coming at Glorilla again after the rumors of her potential nose job, it felt like the continuation of a much bigger issue. She was mocked for her natural look, but then she was mocked again for potentially trying to change it and conform. This is the contradiction that I want to talk about today, because we criticize features like wide noses, textured hair, or darker skin, but when someone decides to change the things that we've criticized, then all of a sudden that's a problem too. This isn't a video about plastic surgery being good or bad. It's about understanding why people, especially public figures, feel pushed towards certain choices, and why the conversation around ethnic features, beauty, and identity is more complicated than we sometimes admit. What's up, YouTube? I'm tinysey, and thank you so much for dropping back in if you are a returning viewer, and welcome if you're new. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like these sorts of videos, and welcome to my digital garden. A lot of us have probably picked up certain ideas about what features are seen as attractive without even realizing it. It's definitely not that we sat down and chose these ideals, we just absorbed them. And that's through things like the media we grew up with, the comments that people made, the way certain people got celebrated while others were ignored. And over time, it starts to feel like there's a pattern. Certain features like narrower noses, lighter eyes, certain lip shapes, or skin tones tend to show up more often in ads, movies, and on magazine covers. Other features might be appreciated sometimes, but they definitely don't get the same kind of consistent praise. And that isn't really about individual bias, it's about the environment we were all raised in. These preferences didn't come out of nowhere, they weren't created in a vacuum. They've been shaped by media history and culture for generations. And what's interesting is that none of this is necessarily fixed. Beauty standards have changed drastically across cultures and time periods. What's considered beautiful in one place or era might not be in another, and that tells us that these standards are learned. They're not necessarily natural. And realizing that doesn't mean that you're a bad person, it just means you've been influenced like everybody else. The question is, once you start noticing the pattern, what do you do with that awareness? Because when certain features are always treated as the standard and others are treated as exceptions or even problems, it makes sense that conversations around changing your appearance carries so much weight. Like we touched on in the beginning, the media has a huge influence on how we think about beauty, usually in ways that we don't even really notice. Because when we constantly see certain features being propped up, then it starts to feel like those features are the default. That's what we're supposed to aspire to. And all of these patterns that we see endlessly start to pile up. Who's getting cast as a romantic lead and who's the comic relief? Whose features are getting softened with the good light and makeup and whose don't? And then we have social media, which adds a whole nother layer to this whole conversation. The posts that get the most likes and shares usually show the same type of faces over and over again. It becomes this sort of loop, and most creators aren't doing this on purpose. I think they're just working with what gets views.
The saddest thing about social media is that if you are considered conventionally attractive, you can get away with whatever you want. There are some creators on here who have done genuinely horrible things, yet they still have a huge platform. Why? Because they have a pretty face. And if you have a pretty face here on social media, everyone just applauds you because you're so great, you're so amazing, you're so perfect. And for creators who aren't necessarily considered conventionally attractive, people are on their asses so much more than these creators who are maybe considered more beautiful. It's kind of disgusting how much social media values appearances alone. It's almost like if you're beautiful, you just have a get out of jail free card for literally any situation.
Over time, it's definitely shaping what we all see as normal or ideal. And if your features happen to line up with what's trending, then you probably don't even notice this is happening. But if your features fall outside of the mold, especially if they're more distinctly ethnic, the experience is different. If we go back to Glorilla for a second, she rose to fame around the same time as Ice Spice, but the media treated them very differently. Ice Spice was often praised for mostly her looks, and Glorilla, on the other hand, was constantly picked apart for her looks, and no matter what she did, she couldn't really win. And the difference is probably that Glorilla is more unambiguously black. And of course that matters because for a lot of people, there's still a discomfort with certain features that don't fit the Eurocentric mold. And when that discomfort gets reflected back through the media over and over, it starts to affect how people see themselves, but also these celebrities. This isn't about pointing fingers at the people that are perpetuating these beliefs, but it is about recognizing a system that we've all been influenced by. Once you can see the pattern, it makes a lot more sense why conversations around beauty are so emotionally charged. In previous videos, I've talked about how weird I think it is that people will zoom in on, scrutinize, and analyze these public figures anytime they change a tiny thing about their looks, and we're way too comfortable doing these sorts of things. For most of us, the only people that we really expect to weigh in on our appearance are our friends, family, and maybe a partner, but when you're in the public eye, anything is on the table. The TikTok creator Zuri that I briefly mentioned at the start of this video had shared shared her post-op nose 5 weeks after her surgery, and this was before the healing process was even close to being done. She got around 30,000 comments on this video, and people didn't wait for her face to settle or the swelling to go down before they jumped into those comment sections. Haley, who's another creator on TikTok, also went through the same thing, and in a video she posted, she said that I got a nose job 2 months ago and the internet hated it.
I got a nose job 4 months ago and you guys tore me apart. You told me I looked like Michael Jackson, a Whoville, and that I ruined my face.
People in the comments were calling her face botched and uncanny, and I say maybe, and that's a really big maybe, that not everyone meant harm when they said those things, but thousands of strangers dissecting your face isn't something most people are built to handle. And it doesn't stop at personal opinion. Suddenly one person's nose job turns into a debate about blackness, beauty standards, and what it means to preserve ethnic features. Zuri's comments weren't just about her face, they became about what kind of procedures Black women are allowed to get and what changes are acceptable and what crosses the line. These creators are just trying to recover from their surgery. Meanwhile, thousands of strangers are arguing about whether they look better or worse and whether they've betrayed their identity or just made a personal choice to feel more comfortable in their skin. This isn't to say that public figures are special cases, but it is to say that constantly talking about people's looks, whether they're famous or not, probably needs to stop. And we've normalized dissecting faces like it's harmless, but that kind of attention can be exhausting and harmful. And maybe instead of offering our unsolicited opinions on someone's nose, lips, or skin tone, we need to start asking why we even feel entitled to comment in the first place. Here's where it starts to get a bit more complicated, and honestly, where a lot of us have to admit we might be a little bit contradictory. A lot of people say that they believe people should do whatever they want with their bodies, but they still will have strong opinions about what's too much, what looks off, and what someone should have done instead. And people like to say that they're all about diversity, but sometimes in actuality, we still carry these ideas about what looks right or natural, even if we don't realize it. That really came through in the responses to Zuri's nose job, because people weren't just saying I like it or I don't like it. They were having full-on debates in the comments about what kind of surgery Black women should be getting. Comments like Black women need to start getting ethnic nose jobs or our features just don't support a pinched nose weren't just critiques. They were trying to draw the line between what's acceptable and what's not when it comes to changing ethnic features. Some people were genuinely concerned, and others were trying to explain that traditional rhinoplasty doesn't always work well with Black facial structures. And then there were people saying, let her be, it's her face. But you can see how fast it shifts from being about one person's nose to being about literally everything else: race, identity, cultural preservation, beauty standards. And Zuri's decision became a stand-in for a much bigger conversation. That's where terms like ethnic rhinoplasty comes in, because this used to just mean a nose job on an ethnic person, but now it's about refining features without erasing cultural identity. It's a response to the fact that a lot of surgical techniques were built with a lot of Eurocentric features in mind, and they still are. Either way, when people reacted so strongly to Zuri's results, it wasn't only about the outcome, it was about how the outcome clashed with their own personal expectations or their own personal discomfort. We want to support people's freedom to choose, but we also have these ingrained ideas about what's too far, what looks authentic, or what counts as improvement. And a lot of the time, these ideas don't match the values that we think we believe in, aka a person's freedom to do whatever they want with their own body. Another aspect to this conversation is how our appearance connects us to our culture and our family. Our features aren't just physical traits that we have, they carry emotional weight too, and they can remind us of where we came from, especially when we are ethnic. They link us to our parents and the people that came before them, our ancestors. So when someone decides to change a feature that tied them to their cultural background, it can bring up a lot of questions about identity, belonging, and how we choose to honor or relate to where we come from. And for people like Glorilla, who were bullied for their looks or are just in the public eye, making a physical change might feel like a practical choice. Maybe it helps them move through the world a little easier, especially if they're getting bullied. But for others, it might feel like losing a visible part of who they are. And some people don't see it that deeply at all. It's just a personal decision like changing your hair or getting a tattoo. And all of those ideas are valid. There's no one way that people should relate to their features or their cultural identity, and what one person sees as a connection to their grandmother, someone else might see as just a feature that they've never liked. It also depends a lot on your environment, because if you grew up in a place where your features were constantly being celebrated, you might feel more pride in them. But if you grew up being teased or feeling excluded because of how you looked, that's a whole different experience. And let's not forget the financial piece, because not everyone even has the access to the kinds of procedures that can help you feel more secure or in control. So when someone can afford to make a change, it might feel like they're taking their power back, even if other people see that differently. And the truth is that these decisions are deeply personal, and most of the time we don't know the full story behind them. And so instead of just jumping to judgment, we might get further by asking what pressures or experiences might have led someone to this choice in the first place. Let's talk about what happens when you grow up getting mixed messages about how you look. And it's not just about people being outright mean, it's the subtle things as well. I recently came across a TikTok where someone was talking about how Black girls are portrayed in cartoons and how damaging it could potentially be.
I don't mean a bitch about it, but I don't really see anybody talking about how media for children is kind of conditioning children to believe that Black related things are bad or wrong or unlikable. I was watching Barbie with my little cousin, and there's an episode where Raquel and Barbie are having like some kind of contest. It's like a hair contest or something, and they go to the beach, and Barbie comes out of the water, you know, looking like Barbie. And then Raquel comes out of the water, and then her hair turns into an afro. And then they name her as the loser of the hair contest. And my cousin, mind you, is a little Black girl. What are little Black girls thinking when they watch stuff like that, where natural hair is bad?
And this is a trope that I also grew up with, so it definitely hasn't gone anywhere. And stuff like that definitely sticks with you, even though you might not realize it as a kid. But over time, it's sending the message that your features aren't the default, they're the joke. I imagine that this shapes how you see yourself and how you move throughout the world. And it's not just about vanity, it's also about your identity. And if your features don't align with what's constantly praised in media or social media, it's hard not to internalize that. And when those features are also tied to your cultural background, it can get even more complicated. Especially in the Black community, I feel like there's a very specific image of what's beautiful and what that is supposed to look like. There's a certain curl pattern, a certain body shape, nose shape, skin tone, and a lot of those standards, even within our own spaces, are still influenced by Eurocentric ideals.
My tummy hurts, he's in love with her, but for what?
When I saw that video, I got kind of sad because I was like, wow, like, she is the Black beauty standard, like literally what Black people are like, want to look like. And I was like, I don't know. It was just sad because like, I know that I won't look like that ever. Like I can never like change my hair texture or like my skin color, all these things. And like, I know I'm really like, I'm going to love, no, I'm missing a nail. I'm going to love me, and I'm going to like love my skin and my hair and all these things. But I'm just kind of like, how nice would life be if I just looked like the Black beauty standard? Like how much better would my life be? And I know it just sucks sometimes. I was kind of scared about posting this because like, this is so cringe, but like, I like listening to Black women talk about their experience being Black, and I feel like it kind of helps to just like let it out and be like, okay, do we all feel this way, or is it just me?
So even if you are mostly watching Black media, you're still being shown and told that some features are more desirable than others. And if you don't fit that mold, it can mess with how you see yourself. And you might feel proud of your heritage, but still wish that you look different. And that creates a tension that's hard to untangle. Some people might manage to build confidence despite all the messaging that they receive, but that's not the case for everyone, and you can end up internalizing that into your adulthood. A lot of these insecurities start forming in our childhood, and that's when we're the most impressionable. So by the time we are adults making decisions about our appearances, we might not even remember where some of those feelings came from in the first place. Understanding all of this doesn't mean that everyone who gets cosmetic work is insecure or doing something wrong. It could just mean that their choices are happening within a system that sends all of us in different ways very clear and very confusing messages about what's beautiful and what's not. Let's also talk about the beauty industry, because I think it's probably one of the biggest players in all of this mess. It's a multi-billion-dollar machine that's built to help people change how they look. And like any other business, it doesn't just respond to demand, it also has to create it. And so when it comes to ethnic features and cosmetic surgery, that dynamic can get quite layered. Rhinoplasty has been the most requested procedure for 5 years straight, according to the American Academy of Facial Plastic Surgery. But apparently, 80% of their members say that more than 10% of their rhinoplasty patients are coming in for revisions. And that pretty much means that people are going under the knife, then coming back because the result wasn't what they had hoped for. A potential reason for this is the history behind how these procedures were originally designed. Dr. Stephen Williams, a former president of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, talks about this old sterilized surgical mold. It basically was a default nose shape that surgeons were trained to create. A narrow bridge, upturned tip, and small but sculpted. Very much a Eurocentric blueprint. So imagine now that template is being applied to Black and brown faces with completely different bone structure. We can see how it might not work, and in some cases it ends up looking less like refinement and more like someone tried to Photoshop a white nose onto a non-white face. And as we touched on earlier, thankfully the field is evolving, and today the term ethnic rhinoplasty is used to describe a more thoughtful approach and one that works with ethnic features instead of erasing them altogether. And according to the National Library of Medicine, most Black patients who seek rhinoplasty actually want to preserve their identity, not erase it. They're looking for small refinements, not a complete transformation. So this means using techniques that actually respect the structural difference of ethnic faces and crafting results that fits your face, not someone else's ideal. Dr. Williams calls it a form of self-actualization, aligning your outside with how you see yourself inside. And whether or not you agree with this concept, it invites a more compassionate question. Instead of asking, why did they do that? Maybe we should ask, what kind of pressures led them here? I keep coming back to young people because I feel like it's one of the most important parts of this whole conversation, because it impacts them differently, especially because they're still figuring out who they are and how they feel about their appearance. Teenagers and young adults today are growing up in a completely different visual world, and they're exposed to more images of the so-called ideal beauty than any other generation before them. But they're also seeing more diversity than past generations. So there's a kind of mix of progress and pressure. On the bright side, a lot of young people are more aware of the concept of beauty standards, which I didn't really know of until I was much older. They know filters exist and they know photos are edited. They have access to information that older generations didn't really have, but at the same time, they're dealing with nonstop comparison on social media. And for young people from diverse backgrounds, it's even more complicated. They might love their culture, but still feel inadequate next to what's constantly being praised online. They may want to embrace their heritage, but still feel like their features aren't trending. Especially when you see people of color who don't match the so-called ideal constantly getting mocked and dragged in the comment sections, that definitely starts to weigh on you. There was a recent controversy over the 12-foot tall sculpture Grounded in the Stars by Thomas J. Price. It's showing a young black woman in a casual outfit. She has everyday clothes and her natural hair mostly unposed, and it was meant to be empowering, but the backlash was so loud and in many cases very harsh. People were calling it insulting, unkept, fat, black, and ugly, and some even started a petition to have it removed. They were arguing that it reinforced negative stereotypes, and others, including black women, criticized the statue's look, saying it lacked grace or style. Because even in public art, there's a pressure to be beautiful in a very specific, curated way. And we had people like Lizzo who showed up dressed like the statue, stood beside it, and celebrated it. For a lot of people, that moment felt powerful, and it showed how meaningful it is to see yourself represented as you are, not photoshopped, not posed, just existing. So when people say that ethnic features aren't trending or that not fitting the mold makes them feel lesser, it's not just in their heads, it's reinforced constantly, and that's what makes this all so complex. Then there's the rise of cosmetic procedures at younger and younger ages. Teenagers are talking about nose jobs, fillers, Botox, BBLs, and a lot of times this is before they're even fully grown. And that raises real questions about how we talk about beauty, consent, and whether their choices are really being made with a full understanding of what that could mean long term. But I do think a decent amount of young people are really thoughtful about this, and they're educating each other, challenging unrealistic beauty standards, and creating space for more types of beauty to be seen and represented and celebrated. And even if that's not the majority, it's still probably very encouraging to see. Moving forward with more understanding and less judgment means first acknowledging that this stuff is complicated for everyone, and most people are just trying to figure things out. We're all juggling beauty standards, personal identity, outside pressures, and we have to be a lot easier on each other. If you are commenting on how someone looks, especially a lot of these public figures, it's worth thinking about how this actually has an effect, because a single comment might seem small, but for someone who gets hundreds of them, it definitely adds up fast, and everyone's allowed to have their thoughts, but being more intentional with how and when we share them could make a really big difference. It would also probably help to actively expand what we see as beautiful, and that means supporting creators, artists, and media that showcase a broader range of looks. They don't always have to be perfect and ideal or inspirational, it just needs to be realistic. Seeing more diversity actually helps loosen the grip that one narrow standard tends to have. And zooming out a little bit, the larger issue is how appearance impacts opportunities. People get judged, passed over, and even penalized based on their looks. Glorilla's a really good example because she was getting hit with negativity from the very start of her career. These comments probably had real effects, especially since she is in the public eye and we expect these people to be so perfect. It really comes down to how we approach these conversations. Instead of just jumping to conclusions or projecting our own values, we could choose to listen, and people make the choices they do for all kinds of reasons, and we don't always have the full picture. So listening without judgment creates more space for understanding. That doesn't mean we never talk about beauty or stop having personal preferences, but it definitely means that we should acknowledge that beauty, identity, and self-expression are personal, and there's no single way to get it right. What stands out most to me is that we're just trying to make peace with ourselves while navigating systems we didn't really create. And I imagine that the people commenting online aren't trying to be cruel. They're mostly just reacting to the media that's constantly making looks front and center. People getting procedures aren't always trying to erase who they are. They're just trying to feel more at ease in a world that often makes them feel like they don't measure up. And even people voicing concerns aren't always being hated haters. They might be worried about what certain changes mean in a broader cultural sense. And as a video essayist, I definitely understand this. The hard truth is that beauty standards affect all of us, but not equally. Some people can exist comfortably within them, but others have to contort themselves to even get close. And sometimes modifying your appearance isn't about conforming, it's about survival, confidence, and feeling more in control. In the past, a lot of this was very hush-hush and we didn't really have conversations about it. At the end of the day, every decision around appearance belongs to a real person, and that person just wants to feel okay in their skin. It's not shallow, it's very human. So that's all I have for you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you deal with beauty standards in your own life, and what do you think could make these conversations feel more supportive and less stressful? Thank you so much for watching, and if you made it this far in the video, please comment the gem emoji. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.